Hey, what's going on folks, my name's Gray, you're tuned in to Consoletronix, where today I return to the vintage vaults of industry super heavyweights Capcom to bring to you the definitive retrospective of one of the most creative and genre-defining chapters in their storied history, with my look at all the titles that would grace their legendary CPS system 2 arcade board, which for the best part of 10 years would do most of the heavy lifting when it came to Capcom coin-op releases, until the very death of the arcade scene in the early 2000s. But back in late 1993, Capcom, at the height of their powers, would showcase their new hardware with a new lick of paint on an old favourite. Many gamers, myself included, looked upon Super Street Fighter 2 as Street Fighter 3 in all but name. Redrawn sprites, more moves, but most importantly, an increased roster as 4 all-new characters joined the lineup. The fighting game had been perfected, and while both Capcom and SNK would go head-to-head for the rest of the decade in what was a golden age for 2D fighters, it's Capcom who was left standing when the dust cleared. My one and only complaint in my CPS1 video was the lack of meat on the bones of many of Capcom's shoot-em-ups, and while Eco Fighters here is as bare bones as they come, it's not really trying to please the increasingly sophisticated shoot-em-up fans with its Captain Planet style storyline of intergalactic pollution. Fun, but forgettable.
Welcome to the D&D world.
You'd imagine that if Capcom came calling wanting to turn your IP into a scrolling beat-em-up, then you wouldn't have much to worry about when they have a track record of proven bona fide classics under their belt. However, that wasn't the case with TRS and Dungeons & Dragons, who would fight with Capcom like cat and dog over what Capcom could and couldn't put in the game. It's a wonder a game was ever released at all. And a bloody miracle then, that is one of the studio's very best. Released barely 4 months after the original, it makes you wonder why they didn't just release the turbo version and be done with it. Oh wait, it's good old fashioned greed. But as a kid who was there at the time pumping his pocket money into both games and many others, I can't get mad at Capcom, even if it is just Super Street Fighter 2 on fast forward. As a massive fan of both movies and the Dark Horse comic series that first pitted the two titans of sci-fi horror against each other, I don't mind admitting to getting very excited indeed when this one was released. Unfortunately, I never got to play the arcade, but I consoled myself that it would soon come to console with a Saturn or 32X release rumoured. However, events behind the scenes cost Capcom the license, meaning one of the greatest beat-em-ups of all time languished in limbo until the release in 2019 of the Capcom Home Arcade, a full 25 years later. Bloody hell, you'd get less than that for murdering somebody. Capcom have long been known as a company that likes to flog dead horses, from the many sequels and spin-offs ranging from Street Fighter, Mega Man, Resi and more, but at this period there was no constraint placed on developers, and as Capcom possessed a pool of talent second to none when it came to fighting games, their first original CPS2 brawler, Darkstalkers, would raise the bar for the genre once again. Fantastic game.
Capcom.
The original Saturday Night Slam Masters, or Muscle Bomber to give it its Japanese name, was a real hoot. This sequel phases out the wrestling in favour of a more streamlined 2D fighting experience, and the game suffers because of it. By no means bad, and I never tire of the Tetsuo Hara character designs, it's just the wrestling gimmick should have been developed further to really give it a more unique appeal. While certain titles on this list like Darkstalkers are well known to genre fans, Armored Warriors here is one of the more obscure from this time, as its late 1994 release to arcades would coincide with the launch of both the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation, the latter of which would come to dictate the very future of gaming. But I'll talk more of that later. Armored Warriors would receive very welcome ports to the Switch, PS4 and Xbox One in the Capcom beat-em-up bundle, marking the first time this classic mech-on-mech beat-em-up was available on home systems. A classic game from a classic era. Does any gamer deserve to be this happy? The arcade-perfect Sega port would be within arm's reach of my Sega Saturn for a long, long time. But what's been forgotten, however, is that this game, as well as Darkstalkers, were high-profile misses in the early PS1 library, as they came to Saturn successfully, but developers struggled to get PS1 ports running properly, a fact Sega in the UK gaming press constantly reminded us. But eventually ports did appear, but by then 3D was the in thing, and 2D wasn't just shunted down the list of priorities, but begun being purged from mainstream gaming altogether. Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge, or probably better referred to as Darkstalkers 1.5, tightens up the gameplay to really focus on the combo-heavy fighting action, and even throws 2 new characters into the Monster Mash mix. Again, controversy would swirl around the problems with the PS1 port, but Sony's deflection of criticism would ultimately be justified as they lined up another horror-themed Capcom game to showcase the power of their console with Biohazard, aka Resident Evil, and the rest, as they say, is history. The 32-bit era was an exciting time for gamers, but it would also see the rise of import gaming, particularly for those of us with a Saturn. And as fun as it was to get incredible coin-op conversions straight from Japan, like this, Cyberbots Full Metal Madness, it was becoming increasingly obvious the industry was changing, and gamers like myself were being left behind, as fewer and fewer of my friends cared about anything except the big marquee releases on PlayStation. But the very reason I'm here on YouTube harping on about old games is that they're still as good now as they were back then.
Street Fighter Alpha.
With the release of Street Fighter Alpha, a prequel to Street Fighter 2, I began to wonder if Capcom were under contract to not produce a Street Fighter 3. But I joined the throngs looking to carry over my hard-learnt skills to the latest installment in the series. But as you've probably guessed, not for the last time either. I've always felt a little sorry for properties like Mega Man/Rockman, as the franchise consists of some of the greatest games you're ever likely to play. But similar to Sega with Sonic, Capcom honestly seem at a loss at what to do with the character, especially as companies these days try to appeal to older gamers. Mega Man Power Battles is a fun little beat 'em up, but not much more than that. I remember playing the Japanese version of Marvel superheroes quite a bit on my Sega Saturn, and often wondering what Japanese audiences made of it all. Even here in the UK, most Marvel superheroes at that time were completely unknown. But like Dungeons and Dragons before it, with Capcom at the helm, you didn't need to be indoctrinated into the lore because it didn't matter what the source material was. Capcom plus beat 'em up equals a fantastic game. Nothing soothes my shoot-em-up loving soul quite like the sight of a golden oldie shoot-em-up from the mid-80s, rubbing shoulders with the new breed of bullet hell games in the mid-90s, and not looking a bit out of place. This fourth entry in the 1940s series of shooters doesn't push the CPS2 hardware, but it's not trying to. It's trying to be a simple, straightforward shoot-em-up with playability, charm and challenge, and in these departments, it excels. For all those gamers playing Dungeons & Dragons Shadow of Mystara upon its release in 1996, I wonder what they would have said if you told them that they were playing the second to last ever scrolling beat-em-up of note from the very studio who'd revolutionised the genre. They'd probably have tried to get you sectioned. But indeed, an era had ended and almost nobody noticed. This game, along with its predecessor, would be released exclusively on the Saturn in Japan in a double pack, but as we're about to see, the quality was to remain high with the rest of the CPS2 library, but noticeable genres were falling to the wayside. It's Street Fighter Alpha 2 and not much has changed gameplay wise. The roster's blossomed to include perky protagonist Sakura, who Capcom would push very heavily in the promotion of the game, as well as the Darkstalker style custom combo features. And as fantastic as the game is and was, for the first time in the gaming magazines here in the UK, you saw words like outdated and good for a 2D fighting game bandied around. The Street Fighter name was losing its luster. Can't say the fresh in the memory live action film helped any in that regard. Still a great game, but the 3D fighters like Tekken and Virtua Fighter had stolen its thunder.
Capcom CPS2.
You've got to have a few gimmicky games in your portfolio, I suppose. Here's the puzzle bobble inspired colour matching tile game drizzled in cutesy Street Fighter and Darkstalker assets. And as you can probably tell, I'm not a fan of such games, but my little sister loved it, so there really is something for everyone here. I swear 1996 was the summer of sequels for Capcom. Here's Mega Man again in another simplistic battler. Both titles I believe would be available for the GameCube, PS2 and Xbox on the Mega Man Anniversary Collection. Fun for a bit, but I've never really done more than dip my toes into the franchise. I skipped over Street Fighter Alpha Gold because we've got a lot to get through, and I was going to skip this too until reading a little about its release. I saw in Japan it grossed more than any other Capcom arcade on its debut, so now my curiosity's been piqued. Apparently there's a story of angels and demons, good versus evil and all that, but gameplay wise, you just have to answer questions, like you're being interrogated or something. And as I've not got a Scooby-Doo what they're saying, I just have to be like Jack the Ripper and take a wild stab in the dark. But my perseverance seems to have sent the pink-haired bird's knickers ablaze for me, so I must be doing something right. A nutty game which apparently sold well on both PS1 and Saturn. But now after playing all these kiddie games and dating sims, I need to restore my gaming equilibrium. And I know just the tonic.
X-Men versus Street Fighter!
X-Men vs Street Fighter was a big deal in the mid-90s. The X-Men cartoon had made Marvel's band of misfit mutants very popular with audiences unfamiliar with the comics. And now here they were, sharing a stage with the World Warriors. Fantastic gameplay, huge cast, and as sure as day follows night, the PS1 home port was utter rubbish. It's with a degree of melancholy that I played the awesome, if increasingly obscure, Captain Commando-influenced Battle Circuit, the first CPS2 game released in 1997, or at least released in Japan and Europe, as Capcom thought their final arcade-based scrolling beat-em-up wasn't worth the bother of a US release. The writing was now well and truly on the wall that 2D was finished. And just to hammer that point home, the first CPS3 game had been released a few months prior, the 2D fighter Red Earth, and never even left Japan. Gaming was entering a new era, but the industry was becoming more risk-averse. Original sprite-based games are numbering less and less in the arcades as 1997 entered the summer months, and while established franchises like Darkstalkers here were guaranteed box office, like with Street Fighter, the feeling among many was that too much of a good thing was a bad thing. The third installment of Capcom's Spooktacular series maintained the high standards of previous games, but Capcom releasing 2 standalone upgrades within a few months smacked of desperation more than anything else.
Are you ready, true believers? Capcom and Marvel have joined forces once again to bring you it's Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter! Survive uncanny adventure! Don't miss out on the enjoyment of a lifetime! Behold, amazing fantasy! Don't miss the most amazing tag team fighting game ever! Are you ready for a new challenger? Now, come join Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter!
If I'm honest, it was with the release of this game that I began to stop following the latest news and hottest releases and really began to go back and fill out my 8 and 16-bit collections, buying up all the old games that I couldn't get as a kid. And that's no disrespect to Marvel vs Street Fighter, I played it and enjoyed it, but even then, I knew Capcom were holding back. Street Fighter 3 had also been released on the CPS3, but for the first time, Capcom came under fire for keeping their games 2D. But they would answer their critics very soon. The title of this video says every game reviewed, so I'm reviewing it, by God. And while I included it not for completionist's sake, but because I thought I could get a couple of cheap laughs out of it, the joke's actually on me, as Capcom Sports Club, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, is actually pretty good. 3 sports to choose from, simple controls, and it looks like it'd be a laugh for 2 players. Bravo, Capcom. Bravo. we stay the cutesy course with a super deformed beat 'em up featuring all your favourites from Street Fighter and Darkstalkers. Super Gem Fighter, aka Pocket Fighter. Not a lot I can really say about this one, as it does exactly what it set out to do, removing any and all blood and violence from their two most popular franchises among children. Lots of fun to be had, but little replay value.
Capcom presents Marvel vs. Capcom!
I've been teasing you long enough, you knew it was coming, the big one, Marvel vs Capcom. If Marvel vs X-Men saw my interest wane, this is the game that brought me back into the light. Suddenly there was no more talk of 2D or 3D, just a line of people wanting to play one of the hottest arcades in years. It really did feel like an event. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to save the arcade industry, and this would be one of only 2 CPS2 games released in 1998, with even the CPS3 board, which never had a game to really push it, discontinued a year later. Great memories, but bittersweet. Street Fighter Alpha 3 must have seemed quite out of place considering Street Fighter 3 was now on its second arcade revision, but Capcom's CPS2 Swan Song is one of their finest showings. I played this on my Saturn longer than was probably healthy for me. But what did I mean by CPS2 Swan Song? Well, unlike the CPS3 board, which came and went like a horny mayfly, the architecture of the CPS2 hardware was well understood and easy to use, so the last releases on it were from other companies who licensed the technology, while Capcom concentrated on the now much more lucrative home market. And the first of these, Giga Wing, released in 1999 and developed by Takumi, one of the studios who, along with Cave and 18 Rising, would rise from the ashes of Toaplan's collapse, with only one item on their manifesto: to continue Toaplan's commitment to creating quality shoot-em-ups, and I'm pleased to report they held up their end of the bargain with a cracking effort. Ports would follow for the Dreamcast and sequels would surface down the line, but the original is still top drawer stuff. I quickly skimmed over a Capcom Mahjong game, but don't worry, unlike Super Real Mahjong, there were no short-skirted schoolgirls in it, so you're not missing anything. And anyway, I've been wanting to rave about this game since first playing it in my CPS1 video. This is Great Maho Daisakuzen, or Dimaho. Developed by 18 Rising, it's actually the latest in a trilogy of titles that includes Kingdom Grand Prix on the Saturn. How's that for pedigree? Awesome game. Another Takumi effort, another shoot 'em up triumph. And it's around this time that a new phrase would come to gamers' attention: bullet hell. In truth, the genre had been around a while, but mostly in the doujin or fan game community built around the Japanese computer scene. The most famous example probably being the Toho series. Mars Matrix here is an outstanding title, but requires practice as the game's bullet deflection mechanic has to be learnt. Overall, a great game from a dying genre. I know full well that what I'm about to say comes from my own insane leaking brain, but I like to think that with all these shoot-em-ups of the highest caliber being produced on their own hardware, stung Capcom to finally release an update to the aging 1940 series. 19XX The Loop Master, an odd title for a game that feels a bit old-fashioned after the Tukami games, but don't be fooled, there's a great game here that proves if it ain't broke, it don't need fixing. I've been a fan of the old Pang or Buster Brothers games a long time now, but I have to admit, I never played this version, Mighty Pang, and I have to be honest, it surprised me. It really does have that old school Pang feel. Like with Loop Master I just looked at, it's the gameplay that it sells itself on, and that's as good as it's ever been. I can't believe we've got through almost 40 games covering some of the most difficult years in the industry's history and have yet to turn up any stinkers. Because if you think Shoot 'em Up Supremo's Cave are going to let the home team down, then hang your head in shame. This is Pro Gear, a game I dabbled with once or twice in the past when I was on a bullet hell bender. Coming back to it with a clear head, I think it's one of Cave's very best. Easily the most accessible for newcomers to the genre, but that may be Capcom's influence. Outstanding game. I was originally planning to wrap up this video on a high with Pro Gear, but there are 3 more titles left, so we've come this far, we might as well see this through to the end. Anyway, I wanted to check this game out as I've heard good things about it, and it's from the developers of Pang. Despite my heart still racing from playing all those 24 karat gold shooters, I'm really liking this colour ball matching game that has enough little tweaks here and there to make me want to come back to it when I'm done. This is a really, really good game. Okay, I've knocked another Mahjong game on the head to come to the final CPS2 game ever released in 2003. We started our journey with Street Fighter, so it's only fitting we end it as well. This is Hyper Street Fighter 2, The Anniversary, a celebration of 15 years since the very first, and by now all but forgotten, Street Fighter came out in 1987. I mean, it's not even included here for fuck's sake. The home release of this game even came with a copy of the Street Fighter 2 animated movie. I had it on Xbox with a special limited edition 6-button controller. And that's it. We've covered all the games that matter anyway, that make up the CPS2 library. There'd only be about 5 or 6 games on the CPS3, but if you'd like to see me look at them as well and complete the trilogy, let me know in the comment section down below. So, my name's Gray, thank you very much for sitting through my rabid waffling for so long, and until the next time, goodbye.